Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, oh, the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket trembling, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the brave, and the home of the brave? Because we are the brave. Yes, we are the brave. We'll fight you in name, the name of the brave. We are the US of A. For those unaware, that flag is still there. It's your future to save. Stand of the brave, the US of A. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the brave, and the
Out of control spending, a government that no longer works for the people. Had enough? Then vote for Stone Anthony for president. Replace politicians with a citizen statesman. www.stoneanthony2016.com.
Bring in, as promised, Academy Award-winning documentary filmmaker Michael Moore. Michael, good evening.
Good evening, Keith.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is Rachel Maddow. Good evening, Rachel.
Good evening, Keith.
There's been a spike in the desire to own guns in Connecticut. Statewide, over 90,000 guns have been authorized for sale. You know how I feel about it.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Good evening, my fellow Americans, my fellow patriots. It is Friday, January the 17th, in the great U.S. of A. You're listening to the Midnight Patriot radio show and podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Norton. You can join me live here every Monday through Friday from 9 p.m. till 12 a.m. Central Standard Time. Tonight we're going to have actually an abridged show for obvious reasons. Tomorrow morning, I actually have to gut the studio. I'm going to start on it tonight. We're going to move the transfer to the feed later on tonight over to a backup server, to our backup servers. We're going to gut it. We have a small construction crew coming in. We're going to be adding a little bit more space so that we have a little bit more space for our equipment. As you guys know, with Patriot FB Radio, it is taking off, so we have to add more space. It never ends. More servers and stuff. So we're going to do that tomorrow morning. And so in preparation of that, I need to start getting some audio equipment. The construction guys are going to be here bright and early in the morning and everything. And, to be honest with you, it's Friday. We need to just kind of kick back. But before we cut out of here, and I'm going to do a replay, a show that we did, our very first inaugural show with Ellen Brown, author of Web of Debt. I know a lot of you guys have been requesting that. We're going to get that played on tonight. It's about an hour and a half. And then we'll wrap it up and then call it a night, go into the weekend. But before we did that, I wanted to kind of reach out to you guys and let you know, you have to go out to freedomprepper.com. That's freedomprepper.com. Scott or Patriot FB, he's going to be getting it up there pretty quick. But if you go out to Patriot FB and look under Scott for Freedom Prepper, he has put together an incredible shirt honoring the 22 men and women as we talk about it. If you don't know what we're talking about, then you need to listen to the show some more. But for those that do know what we're talking about, just an incredible shirt. You guys need to get out there. You need to get them purchased so that way we can get them in production. Now, we're also going to be doing some with a local T-shirt maker. I don't want to diminish what Scott's doing there, because all the proceeds, every dime goes to aid our vets and everything. So that's a great noble cause. So I highly recommend that you guys get out there and you take a look at those shirts. They're just incredible design. They don't come. I'm a 3XLT. I'm a big guy, about 6'6", solid dude. You ain't gonna move me, but I need a bigger shirt, so I'll have some made for me. But along that, I've got a local T-shirt guy. We're gonna get some made up, and then we're gonna sell them at different events throughout the area and stuff. But get out to Scott's site. That's freedomprepper.com. freedomprepper.com. Like I said, tonight what we're going to do is we're going to do a replay of Ellen Brown, author of Web of Debt. That's going to be about an hour and a half. It's going to carry us into about 11:30 tonight. About 10:30, I should say. And then we're going to shut it down because we got to start moving equipment. But you're listening to the Midnight Patriot radio show and podcast. We're going to be live again Monday. Over the weekends, of course, we'll be doing some things, playing music right here. But I just want to tell everybody, have a great weekend. Spend some time with your families. God bless you. We'll hook back up on Monday. Our new studio with our old studio just revamped. A little bit more ergonomic, a little bit more geared towards news broadcasting. So we're going to be making some capital improvements over the weekend, and look forward to getting back in here after we get it done, so we can put together a quality show for you and everything. But you're listening to Jeff Norton, the Midnight Patriot radio show and podcast. Join us on the web at www.patriotfb.com. That is www.patriotfb.com, or live here every Monday through Friday from 9 p.m. till 12 a.m. Central Standard Time. Good night.
Country's done. They say that the stock market's gonna crash. They say that every single one of us is gonna let down while they walk across our back. But I'ma stand up. I'm gonna put my fists in the air. No, I don't wanna have to bring my guns, but I'll be ready if it goes there. But you can let down if you wanna. You can run away if you wanna. You can pretend that this is totally okay if you wanna. You can play it dead if you wanna. Care what they say. of the USA. We're hardworking, honest, and we make our money the good old-fashioned way. But you can lay it down if you wanna. You can run away if you wanna. You can pretend that this is totally okay if you wanna. You can play it dead if you wanna. Forget what they said if you wanna. Turn your back on the country needing you right now. But I don't wanna. No, I don't wanna. Well, I say that the country's fine with a little hard work and prayer. We can get her back on her feet, 'cause I believe she belongs there. So let's stand her up and brush off the dirt and dust. A Lady Liberty needs our help from every single one of us. But you can lay it down if you wanna. You can run away if you wanna. You can pretend that tyranny is totally okay if you wanna. You can play it dead if you wanna. Get what they said if you wanna. Turn your back on the country needing you right now. But I don't wanna. No, I don't wanna. But I don't wanna. No, I don't wanna. So let's stand up, put our fists in the air. No, we don't wanna have to bring our guns, but we'll be ready if it goes there, yeah. So let's stand up, put our fists in the air. No, we don't wanna have to bring our guns. No, we don't wanna have to bring our guns, but we'll be ready if it goes there. Ready if it goes there. Ready if it goes there. Be ready if it goes.
Bring in, as promised, Academy Award-winning documentary filmmaker Michael Moore. Michael, good evening.
Good evening, Keith.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is Rachel Maddow. Good evening, Rachel.
Good evening, Keith.
There's been a spike in the desire to own guns in Connecticut. Statewide, over 90,000 guns have been authorized for sale. You know how I feel about it.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
what an intro. You're listening to the Midnight Patriot Show. My name is Jeff Norton. I am your host. Today's a very special occasion for us, for all those that don't know. It is our inaugural show, number one. Number two, it's Labor Day. We couldn't think of a better holiday to celebrate the launching of our new show, coinciding with Labor Day. We want to thank all of those who've gone out there and fought for our labor rights, gave us these great holidays. For those that don't know, a lot of the things that we benefit in today's workplace came from those that fought for our rights, and we just want to say thank you to all of those out there who have sacrificed so much to give us the rights and privileges that we enjoy today and also take for granted. But also, I want to add, I don't know how we're going to be able to top this, but we've got a very special guest that we interviewed last week, and we're going to play that interview for you in its entirety tonight. It's an interesting topic. It's one that you hear a lot about, especially with a lot of the financial issues that are going on in our economy and in our government. We couldn't think of a better topic to bring out and play this interview for you. Miss Brown is an author. She's also a lawyer fighting for the advocacy of alternative medicine. That's mainly what the focus of her practice was. But while she's here tonight, we're actually going to talk about two books that she wrote. One several years ago about the Federal Reserve and the private banking system, and one that was just actually released this June. It's called the Public Bank Solution from Austerity to Prosperity. It's a solution-based book. I highly recommend it. Just started reading it myself, but I'm sure it's going to be a page-turner just like her other book was. The book that we're going to focus on tonight, and most of the interview, though, is going to be The Web of Debt, the shocking truth about our money system and how we can break free. Miss Brown wrote this book several years ago, and she'll go into that a little bit into the interview, as she was doing research in her alternative medicine writing, and she found some corruption and fraud. And I don't want to give away the interview too much, but it's a very interesting topic. So I want to kind of lay the groundwork out here. We're not going to follow our normal format tonight. I want to give you this interview in its entirety with very limited advertising or interruptions. It's going to run a full hour and 30 minutes or thereabouts and everything. It's not our normal format, but I felt that this interview, we were on a roll. You'll hear actually in the conversation, and we were just having a phenomenal discussion, and we just wanted to let it continue without any breaks and everything. So once again, I want to introduce our audience to Miss Ellen Brown.
I'm fine, thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, I have to say, I was reading your book, and I've read a lot of books about the Federal Reserve and different things like that, but I have to give you kudos. Your book, by far, is the most interesting book, The Web of Debt, on the Federal Reserve. The way that you wrote it, I'll tell you, I could not put it down. I couldn't do it.
That's great. Well, thanks. Well, I'm a writer first, a writer in search of a good subject, so.
It was an excellent.
All that.
Well, that's the thing, and it shows in the book. I mean, the way that it was written. One of the things that we'll get into a little bit later, I guess, in the conversation, is how you tied in one of the most popular classic movies of all time into it and everything. But I do have to ask. This is one question I had. Did you write this book while you were going to law school, or?
Oh no.
Okay.
Long afterwards. And
okay.
I went to law school, I hesitate to say, when I graduated in 1970.
Wow. So, yeah, I was wondering about that because I was like, I was reading your bio, and it was a little confusing because I was like, wow, she actually wrote this book while she was doing law school and stuff, which is a phenomenal feat.
No, I actually quit. Well, I practiced for 10 years in Los Angeles, and my ex-husband burned out on Beverly Hills Law and wanted to go in the Foreign Service. So I agreed to that. For a number of reasons, for family reasons and stuff, time with the kids and all. But it would give me a chance to write. And so, really, when I wrote, I only wrote. I tried getting up early in the morning and writing, and then going off to work. And then we had 2 kids who were quite small then. And then when I would get home, you had to do the baths and read the stories and so forth. And it was just way too much. I mean, I just didn't have what I really didn't have the energy for was the evenings. I would get home and my adrenaline, I'd shot my adrenaline all day. I mean, it was like run up my adrenaline all day, and then you get home and you're ready to crawl into the bath yourself.
But it's amazing. I mean, I understand people, the desire to write. I'm a writer as well, but for was the Web of Debt your first book that you wrote?
No, it was my 12th.
Your 12th book. So
11th, and now I have a 12th, which is the Public Bank Solution, which is a follow-up with Solution.
Okay, because, wow, I mean, what a topic. I mean, to come out and to hit it like that, and like I said, as we get more and more into the book and stuff, I mean, I think it's going to become self-evident to a lot of the listeners is your ability to transform something that is so unknown to the average person, and be able to blend in, a classic story, a classic movie, The Wizard of Oz, for those that don't know, and to be able to tie that together in such a way that it made it interesting. And I can tell you, as I read the book and as I, recalled watching the movies and stuff, I was like, oh, aha. I had those aha moments, and you did that so marvelously. I guess, like any good story, any good, I want to call it a Greek tragedy. Let's just start at the beginning. First, what caused you to want to write about the Fed?
Well, I started out writing about health, and I collaborated with several doctors writing several different books, and then I got into I wound up representing an alternative cancer healer in Tijuana, and in the course of that, I saw how corrupt the whole cancer business was, and the medical business in general. I mean, how profit-driven, which is antithetical. I mean, their market are sick people, and so they really have no interest in getting people well. And then the people who are getting people well with natural remedies, which of course you can't patent and therefore you can't make any money off of, they suppress that because they don't want anyone to know that there are those alternatives out there. And so I got into the politics of health, and then I read a book by Ed Griffin called The World Without Cancer, and he linked the drug cartel, pharmaceutical cartel, with the banking cartel, and showed that was where they got their power. I mean, they were basically one big cartel. And so that's when, that was my aha moment, that was what you had to hit. If you wanted to fix the problem, you really had to fix the banking system, because that was where they got control of the economy and got this enormous amount of, that's how they managed to enslave us, basically, by decreeing 30 to 40% of everything we buy goes to interest. If you add up all the interest charges of all the producers in the chain of production, people aren't aware of that, but that's why there's just never enough money out there to cover the demand for it. There's always more demand than there is supply, because demand includes principal plus interest. But because banks actually create money in the form of loans, they don't create the principal. The interest. They only create the principal. And so more is always owed back than is out there. So more loans have to be taken out. They purposely maintain a tight money supply so that there won't be enough money to go around, so that we'll have to borrow. That we don't just get paid enough to buy our GDP. We have to borrow some extra to cover the whole bill, and that keeps everybody in debt, and not just people, but governments, businesses, everybody's heavily in debt.
Yeah, that was one of the things that was amazing. Like I said, I always ventured or thought myself as an avid reader, understood the Fed and how it operated, and that was one of the things that a lot of our listeners and people that that we talk to on a day-to-day basis don't understand. Number one, you clearly pointed out the Fed is not part of the federal system of government. It is a privately owned organization, as you stated in your book. But the other thing that was shocking, more so, that I learned, is that the Federal Reserve was developed, or it was a cartel, and it was a legally, I guess, sanctioned cartel by our government, actually by members of our government. If you want, let this kind of start there, and kind of how did the Fed get started?
It was passed in 1913. There was a major, all through the 19th century, there were bank panics where, at that time, banks issued our money in the form of banknotes. So most of our money consisted of these paper banknotes that were literally, there was no question that these were privately issued because they had the name of the bank right on it. And what they represented was your right to a certain amount of gold, your claim on a certain amount of gold. But they didn't have that much gold. In fact, under the fractional reserve system, they had quickly discovered that they could lend as much as up to 10 times as much, or they could have as much as 10 times as many banknotes out there as they had gold. But periodically people would figure that out, that they didn't have the gold. For one reason or another, the bank would lose credibility and people would rush to the bank to get their money and it wouldn't be there, and then there'd be a panic, the bank would close their doors, and it would be a recession or a depression. So there was wave after wave of these inflations and then depressions, which was called the business cycle, as if it was a natural thing, but it really was caused by this mathematical impossibility of, there just wasn't enough of the collateral, the gold that was supposedly represented by the banknotes to cover anywhere near the banknotes that were out there. So in 1907, there was a major bank panic, which there was evidence that it was actually triggered by J.P. Morgan, the man, not the bank, who and then J.P. Morgan came in and saved the day by coming up with gold from England, because he had nefarious contacts with England, or he was probably put here by the Bank of England. And then the J.P. Morgan, or the Morgan people and the Rockefeller people got together. They were actually rivals, but they got together for purposes of drafting this bill that was originally called the Aldrich Bill, and it was supposed to backstop the banks, so there couldn't be runs on the banks. In other words, if there wasn't enough money, then this Federal Reserve would be able to print extra money, so the money would always be there. So the Federal Reserve was set up as the issuer of the money. But the opposition was led by William Jennings Bryan, who was the leader of the populist movement before that. He ran for president twice and almost made it. That was as close as we ever got to electing a third-party candidate. And before him, there were the Greenbackers who were pushing for a government-issued money, and then that didn't work out. That was the plot of The Wizard of Oz. Actually, this march to Washington was represented by the March to Oz of this little motley group of people or beings. So when that didn't work, then the populists went to trying to expand the money supply with silver, but their goal was always to have a money supply that was issued by the people, not by the banks. They wanted government control over the issuance of money, and they wanted government control over banking. So William Jennings Bryan said absolutely not. There was no way he would endorse a bill that would give private bankers the power to issue the national money supply. So they changed the name of the bill. They worded it very obscurely, so nobody could tell. I've read it, and you really can't tell what they're talking about. It is quite obscure when you get to the part about where the money comes from and what they're allowed to be, the collateral and so forth. But he didn't understand it. He thought that the people themselves, the government representing the people, would actually be issuing the money. But in fact, it was the Federal Reserve issuing the money and lending it to the government. So it was a loan, not just a straight issuance of money for what the government needed. Like, you could just have a government like the greenbacks of the Civil War that Lincoln issued, or like the paper script that the colonists issued, where the government just issues the script to pay for the things that the government needs. That would be your ideal populist-driven government-issued money. But instead what we have is this quasi-government entity, I mean, the head of it is appointed, heads or the whole board, the Federal Reserve Board is appointed by the Congress and the President, but the 12 Federal Reserve branches are all 100% owned by the banks in their districts. And the Fed doesn't just pay out money for infrastructure and so forth, the things that the government needs. It lends money to the government and lends it to everybody else. In fact, originally it lent money directly to the government at issued interest. But later, that was too obvious. Well, in the 1970s, Wright Patman saw that they were printing our money and lending it to us and making interest on it, and he said that wasn't right, and so he strong-armed them into paying the interest back to the government. But right now, the Fed is not allowed to buy bonds directly from the government. They have to buy it on the open market, and then they do return the interest, but the banks still are the middlemen there, and the banks still issue most of the money in the country by means of loans.
Yes. So let me get. So the Fed is no longer allowed to issue. They actually have to buy the bonds on the open market. But if they control the money supply and the financials of a country or of our government and stuff, aren't they sort of manipulating the bond market anyways?
They're very much manipulating it, but at one time, the Fed could just walk right over to the Treasury and make a loan to the Treasury, even though they were charging interest on it. The Treasury was funded directly, and then it got to where Wright Patman forced them, or they made a deal where they returned the interest to the government, but then they were no longer just walking over and funding the Treasury. They had to buy the bonds on the open market. But yeah, they're manipulating the interest rates, and right now we have all this quantitative easing, which is not going out into the economy as people think it should be, but it's not. So they're using that for purposes of serving the needs of the banks and not for serving the needs of the local economies.
I guess the some of the detractors of the anti-Fed movement and stuff will go out there and say that, well, one of the lies that people like ourselves say is that the Fed and the way that they practice will cause hyperinflation and stuff, and then of course we look at our inflation rates and most people say, well, it's not too bad, but is that actually the case, or how are they masking the hyperinflation? Because when they start pumping money into our economy, I mean, that's got to cause inflation. It's just economics. How is the Fed masking that?
Well, they aren't pumping money into the economy. That's the thing. It's the nature of quantitative easing. It's an asset swap. So the banks have bonds on their books, U.S. Treasuries or mortgage-backed securities. Right now, that's what they're buying now. Originally, in QE1, they bought mortgage-backed securities. In QE2, they bought federal securities. And in QE3, they're buying a mix of the two things. So the banks had those things on their books originally, and now they have cash. So they haven't actually gained anything. It's just that the Fed now has the mortgage-backed securities, and the banks have cash. But I just wrote an article on that, what the banks are using that for. There's this huge, like $2 trillion in excess reserves sitting on the books of the banks. What are they using that for? Why is that there? They're using that as collateral, or they can, and there's good evidence that they are, using that as collateral in the repo market, in the shadow banking system. And so it's there that they're creating half the credit that's in the country. They create it through the shadow banking system, which is very obscure. That I have that in my second book, the Public Bank Solution. I go into that more. So with that money, they are buying up particularly commodities and things like power. I mean, they can actually buy stock in companies, and they are doing that. And so they're controlling all these critical places where, critical infrastructure of the economy. So you may not see things like wages go up. You're not seeing housing go up. Well, you are, but I mean, it was way low. It went way low. If you combine all the prices, you have very little inflation. But what you do see inflation in is oil and food and those things that are energy, these things that are actually critical to people's lives, even though they're a relatively small part of the market. But those are the things that the banks have the power to then go in and manipulate, or, to buy and to trade in the market and to cream profits up.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things, talking to several people out there, and except for the price of oil going up naturally, but that's pretty much been blamed on the, our foreign dependence upon oil and not on the Fed. But you're saying that actually that a lot of the oil prices and a lot of the food prices being increased is not necessarily the oil or the foreign oil. It is because of this scheme that the Fed's doing.
Manipulation, yeah.
Sure.
And that's definitely true. Well, in gold, the price has gone down, which is also market manipulation, but for other reasons. It gets pretty complicated. Wow.
It's, we're here, and actually, it's amazing when you have a great conversations such as we have, time does fly. We're going to take a break and come back, and, I have some more questions, and I'm sure we're going to dive a little bit deeper into solutions. You are listening to The Midnight Patriot, an interview with Miss Ellen Brown. For more information, go to our website at www.themidnightpatriot.com. You are listening to The Midnight Patriot. For more news and information, join us on the web at www.themidnightpatriot.com.
In a moment, cancer changed our lives forever.
We were told nothing could be done to enjoy these final moments together.
But in that moment, when all seemed lost, St. Jude Children's Research Hospital gave us hope.
Because at this moment, St. Jude Children's Research Hospital is saving lives with pioneering research and care. We're changing the way the world treats childhood cancer by sharing our discoveries with doctors and scientists everywhere.
And we'll never have to pay St. Jude for anything, ever.
At this moment, she wants to be in her own bed.
I want to be back at school with my friends. I want to be outside playing.
Please take a moment and join St. Jude in finding cures and saving children. Visit stjude.org.
There is one book that you should read to understand the current economic crisis. It is The Web of Debt, The Shocking Truth About Our Money System and How We Can Break Free by Ellen Hodgson Brown. It is an absolute must-read for people of all political stripes. The only ideology presented is one of fairness, integrity, and common sense. Get your copy today at your favorite retail or online bookstore. Copies can also be purchased directly at www.webofdebt.com. You've been listening to The Midnight Patriot. If you like what you've heard on tonight's show, we ask that you get involved. Join us on the web at www.themidnightpatriot.com to find out how you can help us spread the word.
America, welcome home the brave. The brave men and women who serve their country are coming home. Home to their cities and towns. Home to their mountains and valleys. Home to their families and friends. Home to America. Some of these warriors are coming home with wounds you can see, and some with wounds you can't see, like post-traumatic stress disorder. Wounded Warrior Project was created to provide the support these wounded veterans need to ensure their return to America is well-adjusted and successful. But we need your help to ensure that our mission is a success. Help us honor and empower these wounded warriors. Contact us at findwwp.org. America, welcome home the brave.
But I think you clearly kind of demonstrated that a lot of it has to do
to the Midnight Patriot.
with the fact that
For more podcasts,
with
join us on the web at
www.themidnightpatriot.com.
You're listening to the Midnight Patriot. Now back to our interview with Miss Ellen Brown.
It was real estate. Real estate was the big bubble, and that was the hot thing to invest in. And then when that bubble collapsed, then they move into something else, which at the moment is commodities. It could be something else later, but it's, has a horrible effect on third world countries, for example, where food is their biggest expenditure, and if that goes up by 50%, they don't eat.
Which is amazing because, I went, obviously with gas, we all know that when you go fill up your tank of gas. You're in Los Angeles, so what's the average cost of gas there?
It's about $4.
Yeah,
I think.
we're about $3. I filled up my tank yesterday, and it was about $3.55 a gallon. And I know that down in Chicago has. I've seen it about $4.06 a gallon in Chicago. It's just unbelievable. A lot of, and I guess that's what the problem is a lot of Americans, a lot of the listeners out there, we're being pinched at every direction. And so when they hear that doesn't concern me. That has nothing, to do with me. What they do in Washington is what they do in Washington. But a lot of people don't understand that those decisions and those deceitful practices that the banking cartels do does affect us. And, obviously with gas prices, food prices, some of the other things, I know a lot of people lost their homes. One of the cases that you actually cited in your book was a legal precedent that was set a long time ago. And if you want to talk about that, which is just amazing, on how that was played out in our court system.
Unfortunately, it was in a different legal stream. It was the justice of the peace system, which in the 19th century, the justice of the peace system was very big. It was these justices that went around on horses from town to town, and they were sort of free thinkers because they didn't see all the precedents above them. So that precedent is not binding on anything, but it was so clear that it was a man that argued that the bank, that he didn't owe anything because the bank hadn't actually lent the money, that they had just created this money on their books. And the banker admitted that was true, that that's the way the loans work now, and everybody knows that now. If you look into it, banks that's common knowledge now, that the way banks create, or that the way most of the money comes into the economy is the banks simply create it as credit on their books. It's sort of like giving you an overdraft in your account, and then they write it up on one side of their books as an asset and on the other side as a liability, and so it comes out to zero. If you want a $500,000 mortgage, they'll write $500,000 on one side of their books as an asset to themselves because you're going to pay them $500,000 over time plus interest, and then they write it as a liability to themselves because when you write your check to the seller, that they're going to have to be liable for that. But where they get the money when your check has to clear, they borrow it from their other depositors, or if they don't have the deposits, then they borrow it from the money market or the repo market. Basically, what they're doing, if they borrow it from the Fed funds rate is the other banks. So if they're borrowing it from the customers of the other bank, they could be borrowing it directly from the bank that took the $500,000 check. So it's like check kiting, where they create $500,000, it goes into another bank. The first bank didn't have the money, so they borrow $500,000 overnight, rolling it over repeatedly, borrow it overnight from Bank B, where the check just went. So they're basically borrowing back the money they just created. It's going to rest somewhere. Somebody's not going to spend it. That seller probably is just going to tuck it away in his account for a while. And when he spends it, they'll find it somewhere else. It's all one big system. And so the bank knows they can find it somewhere, unless you have some chink in the armor, like when Lehman Brothers went down, something that freezes the liquidity, as they say, the ability to borrow it from somewhere, to get it from somewhere else. Yeah. At the time when that decision came down, I think it was in the 60s, that was pretty eye-opening.
Well, and I think that's one of the most recent criticisms of the Fed was the fact that with Lehman Brothers, why did they let Lehman Brothers fail but bail out AIG?
Yeah, because Goldman had a $12 billion claim on it, and they wanted their money. Yep, they didn't have any claim on Lehman Brothers. Well, J.P. Morgan actually took their money from Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers was a pure investment bank at the time. At that time, you couldn't be an investment bank. And, later, the remaining investment banks, Goldman Sachs and the Merrill Lynch, became investment and depository banks, and so they were able to get Fed bailout money and so forth. But Lehman Brothers was a straight investment bank doing gambling in the repo market, basically, creating leverage at 30 to 1 or some outrageous sum where they were lending using the same collateral for 30 different loans, and that's the way the repo market works, or the shadow banking system works. No controls, there's no reserve requirement, no capital requirement. Nobody's looking over the shoulder. Much of it it's called over the counter, but it seems to me it should be called under the counter. It's like nobody's looking. You don't get to look. There's no way to figure out what's going on there.
Which I know that Ron Paul's a big advocate of auditing the Fed. I don't think the Fed has ever been audited, have they?
Well, they say they have, but they audit themselves, so they haven't been independently audited by, Congress, I suppose.
Which is amazing because the classic exchange not too long ago in which I think they had one of the auditors or the Fed auditor there, and they were asking about $9 trillion missing, and from their audit, and they couldn't answer it.
Recently, the Germans wanted their gold, and the Federal Reserve said, they wouldn't let them. They wouldn't show them the gold. They just showed them a couple of bars, I guess, to show that they had some gold. And they said it right now that it would take them a number of years to come up with the gold, which means they don't have it. They've used that gold as collateral for something else. They've used it for loans of some sort.
Amazing.
But we don't get to know, and we don't have the leverage to know. There's so many things that we the people don't know. If you look at wars particularly, but that's a whole different subject. But we really don't have a democracy at all. You have no leverage over Congress or over our government.
When did we get away from I guess, obviously, with the 1913 creation of the Fed, but then, there was laws, it was my understanding, that were put in place to kind of regulate that to make sure it didn't get to the point to where it's at now. When did that change? When did those laws change, and what was the wind behind those changes?
In the 1930s, under Roosevelt and the New Deal, they passed the Glass-Steagall Act, I think it was 1933, which required investment banking and commercial banking to be separate. You couldn't mingle your deposits with your gambling habit. And then in the big banks, helped by Alan Greenspan, there was a big push to deregulate, and this was all under Clinton, so we can't even blame the conservatives. And in 1999, 2008, the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act was passed, which basically repealed the portion of Glass-Steagall that prevented investment banking or depository banks from having an investment division, which then gambled with money. And so now you have JP Morgan and Bank of America, which are our two biggest depository banks. They both have over $1 trillion in deposits, and they also have over $70 trillion in derivatives. And they are very likely to be the next Lehman Brothers. I've heard people say, or the next. I think Bank of America is the most likely to go down next. I've heard people say that, well, it wouldn't help to reimpose Glass-Steagall. It wouldn't have prevented the Lehman Brothers collapse in 2008 because Lehman Brothers wasn't even a depository bank. Well, that's totally true. But now what we have is something far worse, is we actually have a commingling of huge depository banks with huge derivatives gambling. And when those gambles go bad, as we've seen a few go bad, not to the extent of $700 billion, but like the London whale was $6 billion and so forth. When you have a huge one that's so big that it's going to take down the bank or would otherwise make the bank insolvent, they're going to go after the deposits, and that's the whole bail-in thing, that the bail-in templates that have been put in place all around the world, mandated in 2011 by the Financial Stability Board. I'm probably getting off every year, but.
Which, I know that there's a huge push to reinstate the Glass-Steagall Act. I guess they feel that would accomplish two things. Number one, it would bankrupt a lot of the banks that were commingling, number one. And number two, one of the biggest arguments, of course, like organizations like Wolfpack, who are wanting to do a convention, constitutional convention, to take the money out of politics. A lot of the argument is that if we reimpose Glass-Steagall, we would get rid of the money in politics because there wouldn't be any money left.
I think my personal thing is that we need to own the banks, or some banks, and that the ideal model is the Bank of North Dakota, which is North Dakota is the only state that owns its own bank, and it was the only state that escaped the credit crisis. They're doing very well. The bank returns its profits to the government. So basically it returns the profits to the people. So what you have is a sustainable system. Instead of having bank profits being siphoned out, they're continually pulling out more than they put in the form of loans, and that money's going into offshore tax havens. There's now, I think it's between $21 and $30 trillion in offshore tax havens. So they're not paying taxes. But they're also just not putting that money back into the economy. It's just sitting there sucking more money out. And if you have public banks, publicly owned banks, which we have, in 40% of banks globally are publicly owned, but you just don't hear about them. That's what I've written about in my new book, The Public Bank Solution. If you have a public bank, it returns the profits to the government, which theoretically is the people. I mean, if we got control of our banking system, we could control our governments again. And then, the Bank of North Dakota has a mandate to serve the public interest, and so that's what they do. I mean, there's no way, they can't make money off of churning loans and fees and bonuses and so forth. They don't get individual fees and bonuses for churning loans. They're just civil servants. They're there to do their job, and they get promoted if they do a good job for the public interest.
Now, how does that differ from like a credit union versus a public bank?
Well, a credit union is owned by private individuals, and so they don't have. I just heard a really good. It was actually in Madison, where you are. It was a class by Gar Alperovitz at a conference, and he said that even though, he was talking about cooperatives in general. He said the model is good. It's good for the laborers, the workers, because they own the company basically, so it helps them. But they still are required to compete in the private market. So they still must cut corners like everybody else cuts corners. I mean, they can't worry about the environment, and they have to keep up with their competitors, and so they're just not in a position to really serve the public interest. If they try, they will probably lose. The good guys always lose, because they're putting money into something that's not crooked. They have to be engaged in sort of in fraud in order to compete with the other fraudsters, or they're not going to stay viable. But the big advantage of a publicly owned bank is that we're talking about public revenues. So all of the states in North Dakota, all of the state's revenues go in the Bank of North Dakota, and it's got a huge capital base. Basically, it's got all the capital of the state. So it is able to leverage that into huge amounts of credit for the purpose of the state, and the profits go back to the state, which is the people. Whereas a credit union they can't handle the public monies because the public monies are too big for a little credit union, and they just don't have that kind of base. And they're actually pretty vulnerable. They can, the big banks are gobbling up all the little banks, and now they're trying to get rid of all the special privileges that, like credit unions didn't have to pay taxes like the other banks, but now they're trying to get rid of that.
Now, are the credit unions part of the Fed, or I mean, obviously they're their own entity, but do they get the benefit?
Oh no.
So they don't.
Oh, I see what you mean.
So they don't get to print their own money if they find out that they're under that 10% with holdings, like a normal, like a J.P. Morgan Chase or one of those banks.
Oh, they don't. None of them prints. Only the Federal Reserve itself prints money, but the federal. There are Federal Reserve members. So all the big banks are members of the Federal Reserve, and actually the Bank of North Dakota is. I think there's some sort of members. They have Federal Reserve privileges anyway, so they have access to the Fed discount window. But the credit unions have their own system, but they still use big correspondent banks, so they're still somewhat vulnerable. I mean, like if there was a big crisis on Wall Street. Even the little banks, they put their money in these overnight sweeps in order to make a little interest. So no doubt, if a big bank went down, it would go down overnight. That's what they do. Or over the weekend, you don't hear about it till Monday. And they could be taking deposits that were in these overnight sweeps.
But isn't there I want to say, we talked about but like a shadow banking system? Obviously, that's probably in your next book. But it's my understanding I believe a bank is required to have so much in reserve or in deposits or promissory or whatever. If they fall below that, they can always go to the Fed and say, you know what, we're a little deficient today by standards, and I guess the Fed will give them a loan to kind of offset that. And that's what I meant about printing money. Actually, they don't have printing presses, as we all know, but they have access to so indirectly.
Fact, they don't even go to the Fed. What they do is their checks clear through the Fed, assuming that the Fed is their clearinghouse. So if the bank doesn't have enough in the way of reserves, the reserves is kind of a complicated system, but the reserves follow the deposits. So if they don't have enough in the way of reserves, the Fed automatically treats it as an overdraft in the bank's reserve account. And so then the bank has to fix that. So overnight they have to borrow somewhere in order to balance it up. So they'll borrow the cheapest place. But if they can't find anywhere else to borrow, they can borrow from the Federal Reserve window, which is discount window, which is 0.75%.
Gotcha. Okay.
Very cheap. I mean, no matter what, they're borrowing very cheaply, and that is the perk of being a bank, and that's why governments should have their own banks instead of having to borrow at 5% and being like Detroit, where they're stuck with these interest rate swaps that they wind up on the wrong. And I mean, all the swindles that go along with the whole bond market. They can be lending to themselves and generating their own credit, and basically escape the whole Wall Street siphoning of.
We'll take a little break here. We are too. I'll take a break, come back, and let's talk about solutions. I think we talked about enough problems. Let's get into some solutions and how we think we can fix this.
You're listening to the Midnight Patriot. For more news and information, join us on the web at www.themidnightpatriot.com.
In a moment, cancer changed our lives forever.
We were told nothing could be done to enjoy these final moments together.
But in that moment, when all seemed lost, St. Jude Children's Research Hospital gave us hope.
Because at this moment, St. Jude Children's Research Hospital is saving lives with pioneering research and care. We're changing the way the world treats childhood cancer by sharing our discoveries with doctors and scientists everywhere.
And we'll never have to pay St. Jude for anything, ever.
At this moment, she wants to be in her own bed.
I want to be back at school with my friends. I want to be outside playing.
Please take a moment and join St. Jude in finding cures and saving children. Visit stjude.org.
There is one book that you should read to understand the current economic crisis. It is The Web of Debt, The Shocking Truth About Our Money System and How We Can Break Free by Ellen Hodgson Brown. It is an absolute must-read for people of all political stripes. The only ideology presented is one of fairness, integrity, and common sense. Get your copy today at your favorite retail or online bookstore. Copies can also be purchased directly at www.webofdebt.com.
You've been listening to the Midnight Patriot Radio Show. If you'd like to help us by sponsoring an upcoming show or by advertising with us, please visit our website at www.themidnightpatriot.com and click on the Advertise With Us button. Thank you.
America, welcome home the brave. The brave men and women who serve their country are coming home. Home to their cities and towns. Home to their mountains and valleys. Home to their families and friends. Home to America. Some of these warriors are coming home with wounds you can see, and some with wounds you can't see, like post-traumatic stress disorder. Wounded Warrior Project was created to provide the support these wounded veterans need to ensure their return to America is well-adjusted and successful. But we need your help to ensure that our mission is a success. Help us honor and empower these wounded warriors. Contact us at findwwp.org. America, welcome home the brave.
You have been listening to the Midnight Patriot Show. If you have a suggestion for a future show or would like to be a guest on a show, please go to our website at www.themidnightpatriot.com and click on the suggestions link for more information. Thank you. You are listening to the Midnight Patriot, an interview with Miss Ellen Brown. For more information, go to our website at www.themidnightpatriot.com.
Okay, that's my favorite part. So I'm president of the Public Banking Institute, and that evolved from, I started writing in 2008. After I'd written Web of Debt, I wrote some articles on what caused the collapse, and that generated a lot of interest. And I learned that there was one state that owned its own bank, and at first there were 4 states that were still in the black, and then there were 3, and then there were 2, and there were 1. There was 1, it was North Dakota, so I was kind of cheering when it was only North Dakota. So I started writing about that, and it generated so much interest that I couldn't respond to everybody's emails, and so somebody suggested I form a Google group, which we did, and then after a couple of years, when we felt like we understood everything, we formed an institute. And so now we have 20 states that have introduced bills of one sort or another for publicly owned banks on the model of the Bank of North Dakota. And it seems to me, ideally, what we want is 50 states. Every state should have its own publicly owned central bank. I mean, you could still have private banks. That's what North Dakota has, more private banks per capita than any other state. And it's because they have this public bank that services them for the local North Dakota economy. It doesn't go off to Wall Street. It's so they can do old-fashioned banking where they keep the loans on their books. They don't have to sell them off to investors because the Bank of North Dakota steps in and helps them with their capital requirements. The Bank of North Dakota is right there whenever they have a disaster like floods, etc. I mean, it's really there to serve the community, and it does serve the community. I'm from California, and California has a huge, they have $200 billion or more than that in the pension fund. They have at least $200 billion in real estate. They have $70 billion in the Treasurer's investment pool. I mean, they just have a huge amount of assets. And that could be, that money can't be used for the budget. It's like earmarked for all these different things. But it could be used as capital, as a capital base for a bank. And then capital is allowed to be leveraged at 10 to 1, so you can create 10 times that amount of money in credit. Now, when to clear your checks, of course, you have to have the deposit, but they also have a huge deposit base. And if you're talking about North Dakota, they deposit not just from state's actual revenues, but they use the agency revenues. So there's just a lot of money that right now is going to Wall Street for Wall Street purposes, that we could be not just using the money ourselves, but leveraging the money into more credit.
People don't realize that our income tax that we pay, that goes to service the debt caused by Wall Street. And what you're saying is that money, could go into these private banks. But I guess one of the apprehensions I have about private banks from being turned into tools against political, adversaries. And that was one of the arguments.
I would see the ideal system as public. It seems to me that banking should be a public utility, but it's just like roads and bridges and power and all those things. I mean, it's the liquidity of our money system. Just like it's like water. It's a thing we all use, and it shouldn't be subject to all these tourniquets, places where people can exploit it. But that just sounds too radical to even talk about that, because we live in the United States. I mean, there's certainly countries that have done it, and have done it very successfully, which I also wrote about in Weapon Debt. One was Germany, but that was their big sin, was that they issued their own money. They broke away from the international banking cartel and just issued their own money, paid for employment. I mean, put everyone to work. They had full employment, at least among I know there were some underclass that maybe weren't employed, but they claimed full employment for the German.
Well, I mean,
anyway, they had a huge.
But no, I mean that was one of the things that we're taught early, in history and stuff, is that one of the downfalls to the German economy was the fact of them putting the money in and causing the hyperinflation. What was the truth behind that?
It wasn't actually the government that was inflating the system. It was the Reichsbank, which at that point, even though it was technically publicly owned, it was privately controlled, and they were insisting on paying out money to the speculators who, they needed more cash in order to sell the mark short, because it was obvious that the government was in debt, wasn't going to be able to pay off this debt. And so they kept doing short selling, which meant they needed more marks to cover their bets, and it got way out of hand, got hyperinflated. Plus, there was the fact that they owed a debt in a foreign currency, and that's where in every hyperinflation, if you look at it, they owe debts in a foreign currency. In the U.S., we owe our debts in dollars, and so we have control over that. So we won't wind up in there.
I think one of the reasons why we are in the Saudi, in that peninsula of the world and everything, is because right now the world currency is the U.S. dollar. We're slowly getting away from that, and I know that Saddam Hussein, one of his arguments is we need to get rid of the world currency of the U.S. dollar and go to another currency. There's a lot of conspiracy about that's why we invaded and everything. Don't know if that's true. Don't have the research to support that. But so one of the things that you just raised a great point is there is a push with China and Russia to move the currency away from the American dollar. If they did that, is that would that cause, or do you see that causing a hyperinflation like we saw in Germany?
I don't think that's the problem. Let them sell. Who cares whether they've got the bonds? We can buy, theoretically, the Federal Reserve could buy up all the bonds. In fact, that's where money should come from. I think that the government debt is the source of our money, and we should acknowledge that and borrow it directly from our own bank. It's just an accounting entry. So then you're not paying interest on it. I think what the Middle East thing is all about, I don't know if you saw, there was an article recently by Greg Palast about in the 1990s when they were deregulating the banks so that they could engage in this huge derivative. I think my next article is going to be called "Making the World Safe for Derivatives." So they deregulated so that our banks could play this whole derivatives game, but they had to deregulate all the banks, all the big banks globally. everybody had to play, because otherwise the investors would take their money to the safer countries where they weren't doing this sort of gambling that was always wiping people out. And so they forced this system onto everybody. So you had your World Trade Organization, which had an agreement that everybody had to sign some sort of financial or regulatory agreement. And the ones that didn't sign, they boycotted and made it very difficult for them. But he mentioned some, but he didn't mention the Middle East. But in fact, in 2001, when we went after, well, let's see, I'm forgetting the man's name. He's a general, and he reported that we were planning to go after 7 different countries, and this included Libya and Iraq and Iran and Syria. And anyway, the ones that, the rogue nations. Well, it turns out all of them are not members of the Bank for International Settlement, and I think I'm going to check, but I think they're all not members of the World Trade Organization. At least I know that Iran, Syria, and Libya were not members of the World Trade Organization. So they're not allowing themselves to be regulated by this system. That the idea is to force this banking system on everyone, regulated by the Financial Stability Board of the Bank for International Settlement, which is what, for example, set out this bail-in template that everybody.
Sure. And did the Carlyle Group have anything to do with that?
I don't know that directly, but I wouldn't.
It'd be interesting to find out, because I know that the classic visit from at that time, it wasn't it was Donald Rumsfeld, I believe, was over there with Saddam Hussein. Had a visit with him, and I know that a lot of the conspiracy theory, and we try to stay away from that unless we can prove it and stuff. But I know that there was a conversation about that Saddam, one of the things was that he pulled out of the Carlyle Group. He was part investor in that, or part of that organization, which, for those that don't know, the Carlyle Group was owned by Bush. There were members, Bush, the Queen of England, a lot of the elite of the world were members of that hedge, or that fund. And I know that Saddam Hussein at one point apparently was also a member of that fund and everything. So, we talk about solutions. I know one of the biggest things, besides, the public banking that you're an advocate for, I know there's a big push to reinstate Glass-Steagall.
Oh, yeah. I think that's a necessity, but also there's this provision in the 2005 Bankruptcy Act, the super priority of derivatives in bankruptcy. That has to be repealed. That is the reason that, for example, in Detroit, the Bank of America, UBS, and SBS took first. You think of bankruptcy as where the bankrupt says, I don't have enough money to pay everybody, so I'm going to put my money in a pool and we'll divide it up equally. Or the court will divide it up equally. That's what you think of bankruptcy. But because of this super priority provision, which allows the derivatives players to go first, in other words, the gamblers get to go before the state and local government, the individuals with their deposits. The gamblers are first in line, and they could wipe out all the collateral that's there. And that's what happened in Detroit, where because they had or take MF Global, where everybody was shocked because the customers who had supposedly segregated collateral with their name on it, that their collateral was taken. Well, how could that be? It was because the derivatives players who were JP Morgan had super priority in bankruptcy. And that was a total scam that was all part of this making the world safe for derivatives. It was something they pushed through along with this whole deregulation.
Now, we talk about derivatives and stuff. Can we kind of back up? What is a derivative? What's their function? What do they look like?
Derivatives are bets. They're basically bets. So it's something derived from something else. So you don't have to own the asset. You can just bet on the asset. So one party thinks it'll go up and the other party thinks it'll go down. So people buy derivatives to hedge their bets. Like they may own an asset and then they'll bet against it. That's the simplest form of hedge. But it all gets very complicated. So, for example, they've sold the biggest form of derivatives are interest rate swaps, and that's the biggest business of J.P. Morgan. I think they have $30 trillion in interest rate swaps, and that's where the investment bank that's going to be dealing with doing the bond issue for the municipal government will go in there and say, well, you need to protect your interest rate with some of these interest rate swaps. You know, they're hawking their own products, and what they don't tell you is this is a bet, and we're on the other side of the bet. Well, you know who can win that bet. The House always wins, and they won big. I mean, they made it so that Detroit and these other cities had to pay them a lot of money when interest rates went down. And what caused interest rates to go down? The Federal Reserve, which is the head of the private banking system. So and plus there's the whole LIBOR rate scandal where they manipulated the interest rate itself. So the cities all lost because of this bet that was sold to them as if it was insurance, but in fact it's just gambling, and they're playing with sharp. What do we call it? What do you call it? I mean, they were not sophisticated players.
Loan sharks.
Yeah. Okay. So like
and that's the thing. You know, once again, is that a lot of people that I talk to. Well, what does that have to do with me? I'm just trying to put gas in my car, feed my family, and keep my job. And one of the things
that's what it has to do with, though. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're sitting here, but
keeping your job and keeping your pension.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is that I think wages in the United States have gone down. Obviously, expenses have gone up. And everything. But one of the things that a lot of people aren't realizing, and we're seeing this, and there were some rumblings about it, and I don't think it's over with. Let's talk about Detroit. Detroit obviously is in bankruptcy or filing for bankruptcy. There's the talk about taking over the pensions. And it's not like they're taking over the pensions to pay the debt for, the street and sanitation and the police and the fire. It sounds like they're talking about taking the pensions and converting that over to these super, as you said earlier, these bankers. And that,
well, they already paid the bankers. It was a deal that they struck before they even did the bankruptcy, which I'm not even sure how they got away with that, because normally in bankruptcy, everything is... Oh, well, I guess I do know. In the 2005 Bankruptcy Act, the super priority and those parties get to escape the stay. There's a stay in bankruptcy where all deals are off. You just have to freeze them in time where they are. So they did this deal right before the bankruptcy, but because they have super priority, they escaped the stay in bankruptcy.
It sounds like the ultimate inside trading. They knew it was coming. They perpetrated it, and then they did
it. They did the bankruptcy purposely to,
Unbelievable. So in the perfect world, like in your book, The Web of Debt, Glenda, if you could be Glenda and you could wave the magic wand, we already talked about, public banking. We've already talked about, reinstating the Glass-Steagall Act and stuff. What would be the trifecta? What would be the third thing that you could do, that we could try to put
the reason we're aiming at the local level is that that's a place where you actually can have some effect these days. We don't seem to have much leverage in Washington, but in the ideal world, you would fix it right at the top there. Go back to the system of the American colonies, particularly the system of Pennsylvania, which had a bank. So the government would issue money to pay for things that people need. In other words, infrastructure, pensions, education, all those things that government is there for. The umbrella that we think that is the purpose of government, the things that connect us and the things that are our security. They would just pay that by printing the money. And you might say, well, that's going to be inflationary. But all that money goes out and it circulates in the economy. So you pay that to the builder of the bridge, and then he'll pay his rent, and then the landlord will pay his grocery bill, etc. So that money changes hands 7 times in good economy. And they all pay taxes. So if they all paid 20%, which is the average tax rate, it would all come back to the government. So it would come back year after year. Or I think you could actually escape taxes altogether if you allowed government to own some businesses. And one of them is Banking is, you could almost make enough money. In the old days, you could make enough money by allowing the government to own the bank. You could make enough money to fund the government itself. That's what they did in Pennsylvania. I mean, now you've got half the budget is the military, so maybe banking wouldn't cover it, but let government own a few other businesses as well, like the internet. What if we had a public internet like they have in Korea and China and Japan? I guess they're running circles around us because there it actually is a public utility.
Yeah, actually there was a article on NPR yesterday I was listening to where they were talking about the South Korean is the most wired country. There isn't, even in the subways, there's nowhere you can go where you're not connected to the internet. Unfortunately, the article was also talking about how North Korea was trying to shut that down. So, but it was just amazing that these other countries, like you said, and going back to that principle, the colony kind of banking system, isn't that what Abraham Lincoln proposed? Isn't that what he did during the Civil War? Didn't he kind of sidestep the loan process and just start issuing?
Yeah, and that's what Hitler did, and that's what supposedly Kennedy was thinking about. There's no direct evidence because he didn't actually do it, but it's been done before, and you see what happens to them. That's what the Japanese did, in fact. Just issued the money to pay for public projects, and actually the Japanese underwrote they subsidized their businesses, their export business that way, and they all got in trouble for it. I mean, it's risky business to take control of your money away from the.
Yeah, I don't think anybody who is publicly, talked about doing that. I don't think that their life expectancy.
Right.
I was reading.
Yeah, you just don't hear politicians. I mean, they don't even know anymore. I don't even think they know the issue. But in the 1930s, for example, the Prime Minister of Canada said, unless we have control of our currency, we don't have control of our government. Something like that. I don't know. He came right out and said it. You would never hear anybody say that.
I know that there's an article, or an excellent book called The Economic Hitman, where it talks about a gentleman whose sole purpose was to go into these countries and basically tout, you need to become a member of the bank, you need to accept our money, or these are the things that will happen. I know that, I don't know the validity or the truth to his claims, but I know that it is out there. It's just amazing.
Yeah, no, I actually know him.
Yeah, no.
I mean, I've met him. Yeah, no, I think it's true.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing. So with that, we talk about, obviously, the public banking, we talk about Glass-Steagall, we talk about issuing the money, allowing the government to get into the business of certain businesses and everything like that. If we could wave our magic wands and get rid of the Federal Reserve, one of the things that is constantly drilled into our heads every day on the news is the debt. The debt. How much of the debt that we see on TV, the trillions, the hundreds of trillions of dollars of debt that we have, that, I mean, it's almost to the point where it's, we cannot, our GDP is being taken up by the debt and the debt ceiling, and everything. How much of that debt is actually Federal Reserve debt? If we got rid of the reserve, could we just, like you said, make a journal entry? Would that put us back afloat?
Well, a huge amount of the debt accumulated over time is interest. At least half the debt is interest. It's not that we're paying, the interest rate we're paying right now is low, but it has accumulated as interest over many years. I know that in France, since 1973, if you add up all the interest, it's equal to their current debt. So if they had not had to pay, if they had borrowed from their own central bank all along, they would have, they would not have a debt today, and that's pretty close to true in Canada too. I've only been able to track the interest in the U.S. back 24 years because that's all that's reported on the Federal Reserve website, or maybe it's the FDIC website. I forget which one. Or maybe it's just, I don't remember which website, but anyway, it's the official website. But but you can't just wipe out the debt in the sense of say, well, we owe it to ourselves, and so we're going to zero it out, because those bonds are, a lot of them are held by investors, pensioners, whatever. They're held by people. The Chinese, they'd be rather upset if we wiped out the debt. But what you can do is just print the money and pay it off. In other words, I would recommend print or mint $1 trillion coins, put it in your account at the Fed, and just start writing checks on it and buy the debt back. That's what they're doing with quantitative easing, only just not in that quantity. Everybody says that would be inflationary, but it wouldn't, because before the debt is our money, so it doesn't really make any difference whether you call it paper dollars. I mean, as Edison pointed that out in the 1920s, whether you call it a bond or a dollar makes no difference. They're both a debt of the government. The government issued the dollar when they had the power to print, like when it was colonial script. The script was a debt of the, was an acknowledgement by the government that somebody had done some work for the government, and this little piece of paper represented, and it was an IOU, meaning basically you could collect in the whole economy, because we, the people, collectively recognize that we owe this debt to you, and we'll all accept those little pieces of paper as our currency, or as something that we'll accept, and then we'll trade it with others. So you could just turn the debt into money, in other words, and you would have, instead of a $15 trillion debt, you would have a $15 trillion money.
Gotcha. So, and then obviously, all right, I'm a politician. I need to get elected. Why? Why have we not done it? Is it? Do they have? Does the banking cartels have that much of a stranglehold?
I think they own the media, and they keep anything out that. Aren't they down to like 5 companies now that own the media?
Yes, pretty much. They
have control over what we hear, except on the internet, but then the internet is not official. Like take 9/11 for example. There's so much on the internet, but if they don't recognize it in the on CBS and NBC, it never happened. All that evidence that they have, it just never happened unless.
And I know that for a fact. Especially in this industry, the radio industry and stuff. About 6% is people get, and most of that is more of the Jon Stewart's. Nothing wrong with Jon Stewart and stuff, but most of the people that do get their information off mainstream media. Get it through, the Colbert Report and those guys, and it's kind of those are the ones that kind of rise up and represent not the mainstream media, and then you get individuals who are out there doing the research and having shows like this. We never get a place at the table. It's obvious. I run into that on many occasions. Good case in point is that we actually Midnight Patriot was actually. Talked about syndication about 2 years ago, right before Gabby Gifford, and then the syndication was pulled because they felt that our format would be a little bit too controversial for the time, and so we had to wait and basically restart. So yeah,
and they also have control over schools and books, the textbooks. I just wrote. So the book I just finished and just published is The Public Bank Solution, and I looked at public banks globally and historically. There was so much information, and I thought, wow, why have I never heard of this before? You would just kind of stumble on it. You'd just look like, well, I wonder what the banking system's like in China or whatever. But we never learned that in school. It was like all hidden.
Well, I think a lot of it has, I look at, I have two children, one that just graduated high school and another one that's in junior high. And, we look at the textbooks or what they're being taught. And even, when I went to school versus when my parents went to school, we were talking about they were required as part of their graduations that they actually had to do they had to memorize the Constitution of the United States. When I went to school, that wasn't a requirement. Now, in some schools, you're hearing that, you can't talk about the Constitution of the United States. Because it's insulting to other nationals who are here. I mean, you hear about these rumors all the time, and it's just
that's kind of like separation of church and state.
Yeah, it's just amazing. It's amazing. So I think what we need to do is wake up. We just need to.
Well, that's the good of the internet. There's hope. That's why I just keep writing, getting information out there.
Well, and that's the thing.
And I do notice an effect this way. I mean, people, one way or another, the ideas that you generate out there, and they seem to be new at the time, pretty soon they become common knowledge.
They will. They will. And that was one of the things. Chicago is a good example. Is that in Chicago, you can't take a picture of an event in Chicago unless you have a press pass, which is issued by the mayor's office. In order to get a press pass issued by the mayor's office, you have to be with one of their listed journal outlets. So one of the things I ran into years ago was taking pictures of the war protests, and if it wasn't for Reverend Jesse Jackson, I probably would have been arrested, because I was approached by law enforcement and told that I didn't have the proper credentials, and Reverend Jesse Jackson was there and basically stood up for me. So, that was one of those things where I was shocked and everything, and I'm appreciative, because I didn't want to spend time in the Chicago jail and stuff, but that's how they're regulating us. That's one of the things. That's how they're keeping us, and it's amazing because they're talking about the fairness doctrine on radio, and then they want to apply it even to us as, in the blogosphere. But then on top of that, you have Representative Feinstein, which is I believe, does she represent you in California, in L.A.?
Yeah, she's California.
Yeah, one of the things she came out and said that, if you don't get paid as you're not media. So you're not privileged to the same rights of a free press. So you're not covered under the same guidelines constitutionally, and that was one of the things that it was unbelievable, But that's I like you said, that's that stranglehold that they have on, because they know mainstream media obviously is not talking about them. It's us out here in the blogger sphere, and then they call us fringe. I actually think that we represent the majority of America. It's just that most of us just don't. We're so worried about paying our bills and going to work and providing for our families that we're not that vocal. We're not out there.
Well, and we're not organized. We need to figure out a way to all get together. I think there's a lot of energy to get behind something, but people don't know. There's this group is moving for this thing, and that group's moving for that thing, but we're not all moving in the same direction. And I don't know how to pull that off. But it does seem like the more we get the information out there, that at least the more we'll agree on a vision.
And and that's one thing I will have to say in your book that I found amazing, and it's something that we try to do here when we're doing our reporting, is that we make sure that we document and that we give have a bibliography and source all our material. One of the things I will have to tell all of our listeners, the Web of Dead, it's a great read. I will tell you, it's one of these books. You did a phenomenal job, Ellen, on bringing the story out. I've read a lot. Like I said earlier, I've read a lot of the books on the Fed. A lot of those books, I actually had to get book on tape and just kind of listen to them, because I just couldn't. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm back in Econ 101, and it put me to sleep. Yours kept me up at night. Yours kept me up at night. It was one of these things where I didn't want to put it down, and one of the and the hard part. And I will say this to our listeners now: don't make the same mistake that I made. I got the electronic version, here on my Samsung, on my Galaxy Tab. I'm going to go buy the actual physical book, because one of the things that the electronic version doesn't allow you to do is, with all of your references and all that, the flip back and forth and check. And I'll have to tell you, it was a phenomenal job on the book, and the way that you sourced it and everything was just incredible. It's amazing, because I was talking to some people and giving examples out of your book, and they're like, "Oh, that's not true." And it was interesting to go and say, "No, here's the source," and it was just and they're like, "Oh, wow, that's amazing." So we're talking with with Miss Ellen Brown, author of the Web of Debt and everything. Can you believe it's been an hour and a half?
It's been long.
It's amazing when we have good conversation and stuff. I mean, obviously you mentioned your new book. What are you doing next? What are you doing now?
Well, right now I'm just writing articles. There's so much going on, and I was really looking forward to a time when I could just watch the news and comment on it. So and then I'm head of the Public Banking Institute, and we're trying to work on videos. We just came out with our first little video on the bail-in, which a lot of people, they just don't read books, but they will watch a 10-minute video.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of break it down into the simple concepts like that. So I'm glad I have the books to point to, because like you say, that's all the data, and if somebody doubts it, it's like, well, read chapter 10, it's all in there.
Yeah. So and how would we
reach the mass of the people? We need some simpler things.
Well, you do, unfortunately. I mean, we're so busy, and a lot of people would say, well, we're just, we're not as smart as we used to, and I actually think the opposite. I think that it's just so much overload, that we get so
I agree.
much information.
Overload, yeah.
Yep. I mean, there's times where, when I'm researching a show or whatever, even myself, I find myself, it's just like, it's just so much overload. And then the other problem is that, you gotta rip the agenda stuff out of there and go right to the thing. Even when you're sourcing clips, like a classic one where, as you actually quoted, I believe in your book, about Woodrow Wilson talking about, I'm sorry, in a nutshell, I'm paraphrasing here, I'm sorry I did this, about the banking system and stuff. So, part of the research was out there was trying to find the actual quote, and then also tying that into the context of that. And, that was just a good example where it was just overwhelming, the amount of information, and that, unfortunately, 80% of it was completely inaccurate, and everything. So, And I think we suffer from information overload, and
I agree.
That's one of the things that you have to be able to do, and that's why I enjoyed your book, is the fact that I was able to go right to the sources and stuff. So the public banking and stuff, how do we reach you? How do we get more information about that?
The website for that is publicbankinginstitute.org. And my websites are webofdebt.com and publicbanksolution.com and ellenbrown.com. And my blog is webofdebt.wordpress.com, but they're pretty much linked to each other.
And you mentioned you have a new book coming out on public banking?
No, it's out.
It is out.
Public Bank Solution. Yeah, it came out in June.
Oh, wow. Oh, you got a sale. I can already tell you. It's I don't know how you track that, but one of those will be mine and everything.
Okay.
And now, going back, do you have anything? Obviously, writing a book and everything. But I mean, is there anything else on plate for you?
I'm speaking in Ireland in October, so I'll be going to Europe in October. But
wow.
I do have, I always have interviews coming up.
You have been listening to The Midnight Patriot, an interview with Miss Ellen Brown, author of The Web of Debt, The Shocking Truth About Our Money System and How We Can Break Free, and The Public Banking Solution, From Austerity to Prosperity. For more news and information, along with future podcasts, please join us on the web at www.themidnightpatriot.com. You can listen to the live show every Monday through Friday, 9 to 11 p.m. Central Standard Time. Thank you, and good night. If I Were the Devil by Paul Harvey. If I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have a third of its real estate and 4/5 of its population. But I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple of the tree, thee. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of the serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what is bad is good, and what is good is square. And to the old, I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington. And then I would get organized. I would educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting, so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I would threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I would peddle narcotics to whom I could. I would sell alcohol to the ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I would tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with the promise of higher ratings, I'd have memorizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects by neglecting to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild until before you knew it, you would have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I would have judges promoting pornography. Soon, I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and defy science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who want it until I killed all incentive of the ambitious. And what do you bet? I couldn't get those whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work and patriotism and moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be, and thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just